and subsequent broadcast via the council's internet site. I will ask members to introduce themselves, and if we go clockwise, the members first, please.
Reg Rice, Councillor for Tottenham Hill.
Councillor John Bevan, Northumberland Park.
Councillor Ajda Over, Northumberland Park.
Councillor Collie Harrison, Crouch End.
Councillor Lester Buxton, Crouch End.
Mark White, Councillor for Tottenham Central.
Councillor George Dunstall, Stroud Green.
Councillor Yvonne Say, White Hart Lane.
Thank you. Then if I could ask the officers to introduce themselves, please.
Rob Szosowski, Assistant Director for Planning, Building Standards and Sustainability.
Robin McNocker, Head of Development Management. Bryce Tubble, Interim Head of Planning Policy, Transport and Infrastructure.
Bob McIver, Head of Building Control.
Justin Farley, Legal Officer.
Jack Booth, Principal Coordinator.
Thank you. So we have no apologies for absence have been received. Are there any declarations of interests or conflicts of interest to declare?
I just give you Councillor Worrell's apologies. Apologies.
Can we record those then, Councillor Worrell, please? So just then, are there any, do the members have any declarations of interests or conflicts of interest to declare? No, thank you. There are no items of urgent business. There are no deputations. So we're now on item 6, which is the minutes, pages 1 to 22. Do members have any comments on the minutes from the meetings on 27th of May 2021, 31st of January 2022 and 23rd of May 2022? Are there any comments on the minutes? No. Are there any amendments? No. So are the minutes agreed? Thank you. So we now move to the adoption of the North London Waste Plan, and I'd like to bring in Councillor Dana Carlin, who wants to say a few words. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Councillor Dana Carlin and I'm the Cabinet Member for Housing, Private Renters and Planning. And this matter is within my portfolio. Those of us with long memories will know that the North London Waste Plan has had a very long genesis, going back well over 10 years. And the plan that is in front of you this evening has been substantially amended following input from local residents and interested groups, and also from the inspector at the inspector's decision of the most recent inspection, in which he found the plan to be sound. The primary changes that you will note is the redrawn site for Pinkham Way, and the need to have biodiversity on the site. I'm pleased to note that the plan that is before you has recycling at its core, which is a priority for this authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carlin. Thank you. So can I now invite officers to introduce the report, and the lead officers are Bryce Tudball and Rod Szosowski. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Bryce Tubble, Interim Head of Planning Policy, Transport and Infrastructure. So this item is around the adoption of the North London Waste Plan, and this committee has been asked to note and consider the North London Waste Plan in front of it and provide any comments to Cabinet and full Council. So it's quite a long report spanning about 16 pages with a number of appendices. So I've got a short presentation here to just guide you through the key elements of the report. So I will talk about the North London Waste Plan, the North London Waste Plan versus the North London Waste Authority, just to check that committee members are clear on the differences between those two, timescales in relation to the plan and community engagement along the way, area allocations contained in the plan, why we need the plan now, and then just talk about next steps and other boroughs as it is a multi-borough project. So what is the North London Waste Plan? Well, it's a waste planning document covering 7 North London boroughs as set out on the slides. It does a couple of key jobs, but what it mainly does is plan for waste management for the next 15 years. So what it does is it identifies areas for potential waste management uses, so sites on the one hand, and on the second hand, it identifies and sets out a range of policies for the determination of waste plan applications. Now, in terms of the North London Waste Plan, it sounds very similar to the NLWA, the two acronyms, but they're actually very different. So I'm just going to go through the differences now. So the North London Waste Plan, which is the subject of this report. So the North London Waste Plan is not an authority in its own right. The North London Waste Plan is a badge for a joint project, waste planning project, land use planning project across the 7 North London boroughs. It's been prepared on the basis of the council's sovereign waste planning authority role and that of the councils we've been working with. So it's a waste planning role in the same way that we have a local planning authority role. So it's about land use planning and the allocation of land for waste purposes. So very different to the North London Waste Authority, which is an authority in its own right, has its own governance structures. The North London Waste Authority has been an external third party who has input to the North London Waste Plan. They've made representations to the emerging plan at various stages, just like a number of other developers and landowners. So it's not been responsible for the North London Waste Plan, and its job is to manage waste transportation and disposal. So moving on now, so Councillor Carlin said that the plan's been subject to a long kind of germination period. It's been in preparation for close to 10 years now. So this slide just sets out the various stages it's been through. So there's some initial, so the Council's Cabinet in 2012 agreed to prepare the North London Waste Plan. In 2013-14, there was some initial community engagement. In 2015, Cabinet approved formal community consultation. Following that, in January 2019, Cabinet Full Council approved the proposed submission plan for consultation and examination. Examination hearings subsequently took place in 2019, where the community and representatives had a full opportunity to have their voice heard and input to the plan's examination. In response to the examination, and particularly to the community's input to that, there were a series of modifications made to the plan, and they were subject again to consultation at the end of 2020. At the end of this process, examination modifications, the planning inspector issued a report to the 7 North London councils, setting out that the North London Waste Plan, as submitted and as modified, was sound and legally compliant. So now the position is for the 7 councils to adopt the North London Waste Plan, of which 4 have already adopted the Waste Plan. Now, once the Waste Plan is adopted, it will form part of the council's development plan, and will be at the heart of making planning decisions. So this is the final stage for the North London Waste Plan. It's been for examination, it's been found sound, and crucially, there is no scope for further changes to the plan as appended to the report this evening. So one of the things the plan does Okay, perfect. There we are. So as I was saying, there are a number of allocations within the North London Waste Plan relating to areas in Haringey. There are areas identified as priority areas, and these are areas that are suitable for built waste management facilities in the future to meet identified needs. So there are 3, and I've got a couple of slides giving a bit more detail on these. So there are 2 in Tottenham and 1 at Pinkham Way. So this slide sets out, these tables are from the North London Waste Plan, and they set out which types of facilities would be suitable within those areas. A couple of key things to note: all 3 of the priority areas are identified as being suitable for recycling uses, and none of them are identified as being suitable for integrated resource recovery facilities or resource parks. So that would include things like an incinerator. So suitable for recycling, but not suitable for an incinerator. So Pinkham Way is a private site which is not publicly accessible. The inclusion of the site in the waste plan has been subject to some quite major opposition over quite a long period, particularly by a body known as the Pinkham Way Alliance. Now, the site is owned by the North London Waste Authority and by Barnet Council. And in the council's current local plan, it's identified as employment land and as a site of importance for nature conservation. Now, through the process of various consultations and examination, there was this full opportunity for the community to have their voice heard. And as a result of the representations, there were a number of quite significant modifications made to the Pinkham Way allocation within North London Waste Plan. And particularly what these do is to set a tighter suitable development area for Pinkham Way. So this is basically saying that the entire site, as indicated by the red line on the top right image, is not suitable for waste uses. A smaller area is suitable for waste uses. And the image on the bottom right of the slide sets out the key constraints which relate to Pinkham Way, which include various environmental designations and some areas of flood risk. And the modifications to the the Pinkham Way allocation also include additional guidance around delivering biodiversity net gain, which is a requirement of the London Plan and is a legal requirement from next year, and also some more detail about the treatment of trees and particularly the replacement of trees if any are lost. The upshot of the examination and the modifications put forward by the councils is that the inspector found the proposal for Pinkham Way to be sound. Now, at the moment, it's an allocation in the plan found to be sound. Once adopted, that's not the end of the process. For a development to come forward on Pinkham Way, it would need to be subject to a plan application like any other development would in the borough. So if a plan application is to come forward in the future, then the council will have the opportunity to consider that. That will be considered against the policies in the North London Waste Plan and against the policies in both the London Plan and the rest of the council's local plan. There's some information here on the 2 Tottenham sites. Now, of note, these sites are already allocated as strategic industrial locations in our local plan. That's a major employment designation, and by virtue of that designation, they're already considered in local plan terms to be suitable for waste uses. Now, a couple of key things to note about Brentwood Road and North East Tottenham. So you'll note that these are quite substantial areas in size. Now, the plan is not saying that waste uses will come forward to cover these entire areas because they're significant in size. What it's saying is that if there is a need for waste uses in the future, then of the areas that will be looked at, these will be 2 of those areas. So you'll be looking at individual sites within these larger areas. Now, in terms of Brentwood Road, you'll note that to the north and to the west and to a bit of the east, there is a residential interface. And the plan is cognizant of that and includes safeguards such that any proposed facilities should be enclosed and should ideally be sited towards the centre of the area. And in the case of the northeast Tottenham employment area, which is identified on the right, there are a number of constraints identified around ecology, biodiversity, air quality and flooding. So any future plan application for a waste use would have to have regard to those. And this slide is just setting out the case essentially for the North London Waste Plan. So what it will help to do is ensure the sustainable and self-sufficient management of waste in North London. So this is about minimising the transport miles involved in the treatment and management of waste, and also ensuring that wherever possible, management of waste is done as far up the waste hierarchy as possible, including recycling. It's also the case, as it is with the local plan, it's much better to have a plan in place than not. So the North London Waste Plan will introduce a number of important safeguards should waste uses come forward in the borough in the future, and it will also help to avoid speculative applications in inappropriate parts of the borough which don't represent sustainable development. In addition, it will also support the production of the new local plan in terms of providing a baseline for waste planning uses over the next 15 years. So in terms of next steps, the plan would need to be adopted by full council. So we're here at Strategic Planning Committee tonight. The next step would be Cabinet, which is next Tuesday, and your comments will be fed on to Cabinet ahead of their consideration of the North London Waste Plan, and it would move on to adoption by full council in July. Now, I explained that this is a project for 7 North London boroughs and that 4 have already adopted the plan. 4 that have adopted the plan already are Barnet, Hackney, Islington and Waltham Forest. And the remaining boroughs, which are ourselves, Camden and Enfield, are all scheduled to adopt the plan at some stage this summer. That's the end of the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I'll hand over to Rob Shizowski.
Thank you, Chair. So this item is presented to committee for your comments, and we will note your comments through into the Cabinet report, which goes to Cabinet next week. So we're just seeking comments, but also if you've got any questions, we would be very happy to answer them. So, yeah, we can open up to questions and comments.
Councillor White.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Rob, Bryce and Dana for your presentation. So just let me marshal my thoughts on this. I'm sure people will have comments on specific sites in Haringey, but I really wanted to ask about the kind of underlying assumptions that we're starting with here. So this plan is basically a planning document that's looking at what land is needed for the kinds of waste disposal treatment facilities that we need in North London across the 7 boroughs over the next 15 years to deal with what is predicted that we're going to be producing. I think that's pretty much where we are. So I suppose what I'm interested in is how we come by the predictions on which this plan is based. And I had some trouble really, I mean, it's a big report, there's a lot in it. It's probably, you know, my fault, but I had some trouble really fully understanding the predictions and making the figures add up really. So I had a look at page 187 of the report, paragraph 4.3, table 3. It talks about an aim for 65% of municipal waste to be recycled by 2030, but it's actually clarified on the next page that it's actually only 50% of LACW, so that would be household waste that we're dealing with. Yeah, so 50% to be recycled by 2025, and then we don't seem to have a target beyond that. So I'm just wondering why we don't have a more ambitious target for that. Obviously, we also talk about moving up the waste hierarchy, and at the top of the waste hierarchy, it states somewhere in the report, is preventing the waste being produced in the first place. So I'm wondering where we are with that, or whether we're in a situation of really, you know, we're having to make this plan as a borough, but it's really the government that needs to be making these. Are we being held over the barrel by the government failing to deal with the fact that so much packaging is basically being produced? I also wondered about flexible plastics recycling and what the provision is for that in the report, because I couldn't find a mention of that, and that is a large part of the waste that we're having to incinerate. And then just in terms of the figures, I couldn't make them add up. because we're still talking about reduction in the amount that we incinerate, although there's a bit of a euphemism that's used in the report that it's a recovery, but that basically effectively means incineration. I think I think that's right, or correct me if I'm wrong with that. But obviously we're talking about reducing the amount that goes to recovery by 2030. But then we look at table 5 on page 191, and we're predicting 566,872 tonnes in 2020, rising to 587,352 by 2036. I see that as a dead 57% in both cases. So I couldn't really see the how those things added up. Sorry, there's so much there, but it's quite detailed. But I just wanted a better understanding of the predictions.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll come in first, and I'm sure Mr. Tudball will complement what I'm going to say as well. So yeah, in terms of how the predictions are come by, I think the table that you're referring to in the documentation is largely reflecting targets that are already set either by the London plan, which is an adopted development plan set by the Mayor. So we are just reflecting those as an input into the evidence base and into this North London Waste Plan, or it is reflecting figures from the North London Waste Authority, which, as we've said, is a separate third party to this process. So they are figures that are set out and controlled by other bodies. So we can't shape those targets and that data and that evidence and the baseline. They are inputs into the process. So you know, I think we'd all generally agree, you know, we want to be ambitious on recycling and sustainable waste, and this reflects what is in there, because as the local planning authority, as the waste planning authority, as the council, and as the North London Waste Plan, we don't control those elements to it. We have to feed in that data into the plan making process, which then we come to planning judgments on the land allocations, where the land should be, what the plan might say. So hopefully that answers a little bit of the question on how those predictions come up with and what affects those numbers as well. So they come from the London plan and from the North London Waste Authority. And it's worth saying as well that the methodology for this, so how you get from those inputs to our waste planning allocations in the plan, is also set out in something called the National Planning Policy for Waste. So we'll have spoken to members before about something called the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF. There's a very special niche version of that called the National Planning Policy for Waste, which is again sets out the methodology for that, and that is what we've had to apply for this. And the inspector has looked at this in the public hearing, looked at all the evidence. This was heavily scrutinised as well, all the projections, everything heavily scrutinised to make sure we're not planning for too much waste, and that we're not planning for too much land for waste, but we're not planning for too little land for waste, to make sure we get that right amount. And that was heavily scrutinised in the examination process. I was there in person at the hearing, and the inspectors looked at that and come to the conclusion that the land allocations based on the projections are sound. So that's what I would say on that. Bryce, would you like to come in on anything to add to that?
Thank you, Rob. The only thing I'd add is that while it is a 15-year plan, it will be subject to monitoring. There is a monitoring arrangement set up for the plan. So if it should be the case in the future that targets change, then like you would with a local plan document, as we are for the moment, then the council would have the opportunity with North London boroughs to review the situation to see whether it is still an appropriate basis for future waste planning in the borough.
Could I just very briefly, just thank you very much for those answers.
Okay, you can come back briefly. Yeah.
That does answer my question, but just to kind of paraphrase, I suppose that to me sounds like the targets are kind of being set elsewhere, and we're setting a plan. And I just something that didn't sit very well with me was in the inspector's report. It referred to legislation that required that the plan contributed to the mitigation of and adaptation to climate change, and that really what we want to be doing is actively fighting climate change, but we're producing a plan that follows policy coming from elsewhere that isn't that ambitious. But obviously, you know, I fully understand your answer and where we are with that, but I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Yeah, noted. If I can just come back and help clarify some of those issues, Chair, thank you. So yes, I suppose what that means is where we can shape things as planners and as the local planning and waste planning authority, that we do actively fight climate change. So much of the plan is designed around, you know, minimising the road trips needed to transfer and transport the waste, and various other mitigations to do with climate change. So that's where we can shape it, and we think the plan does have the policies and mitigations to do that, where we have power to influence it.
Did you want to add anything? No, thank you. Okay, so Councillor Rice, please.
Thank you, Chair. My points are fairly simple and straightforward. Brentwood Road is listed as suitable site for waste disposal and other waste activities. Brentwood Road consists of residential houses and part of Brentwood Road. If we couldn't allocate Pinkham Way, which is a wild site, through waste treatment, how are you going to do that with Brentwood Road, where there's actually people's houses living there? And then you said North East Tottenham is selected as a super site. Well, what's meant by North East Tottenham? Tottenham Hotspurs are very much part of North East Tottenham, and I'm pretty sure they're not going to agree for a waste treatment plant of any sort plonked inside in front their stadium, which they spend millions building. It always is the case, is it not? When matters such as this come before any council committee, Tottenham always comes out worse. That sort of culture, is quite frankly, has got to change. It is not to be good enough.
Thank you, Councillor. So the plan as it is in front of you does propose to allocate both Brentwood Road, North East Tottenham and Pinkham Way, not one or the other. And Brentwood Road and North East Tottenham are sites that are already allocated for industrial purposes already, no matter what happens with this particular plan. And they're actually already identified for waste. So it's not actually changing anything there. What this plan does is it actually gives extra protection for any waste purposes that come forward in that area. It gives extra protection to the local residents. So it actually applies extra environmental policies and controls. And as Bryce talked about in his presentation, steering development towards the middle of those sites, which is away from the residential areas. So there's specific policy actually to steer it as far away from the residential properties as possible. So if this plan didn't exist, if this plan wasn't to be adopted, those safeguards and extra controls would not be part of planning policy. So absolutely, it's really important that these are identified, that they are in close proximity to residential areas, but there are protections in place. And in terms of what is North East Tottenham, that was on the map that Bryce had on the screen, and I can't find the map page number in the report at the moment, but it's in there. It's got a red line drawn around it. It's identified. So there's a specific North East Tottenham. Sorry.
Excuse me, Chair. In North East Tottenham, what are the streets which are classified as being in North East Tottenham?
So let's just see if we can bring up the map just to help clarify that point. Just bear with us 1 second. We had it earlier. So if you can bring it up, that'd be great. Thanks, Bryce.
I can't see streets.
If it helps, I can show you your SADX Bryce on the screen so you can see it directly.
before the committee to include North East Tottenham as a suitable site for waste dealings. I simply want to know what streets that's comprised of, because North East Tottenham is quite a heavily populated area. Why can't no one say to me what the streets are?
We're just trying to find some better mapping, so bear with us. Thank you.
Chair, there's a map on page 274 of the pack.
It doesn't,
Streets
it
in
doesn't
it,
have the
doesn't
street
have
names,
streets.
no. So I've got Brentwood Road, West Road, Tariff Road,
What road?
Tariff.
Oh, yeah.
So those are the main roads that it's allocated within. And it's already an industrial area, so the lineation is roughly the same as the existing industrial area.
Roads you just called out.
The North East Tottenham employment area covers Garwin Road, Sedge Road, Leaside Road. So it's west and east of Watermead Way, south of Leaside Road.
Okay, does that answer your, or partly answer your question, councillor Ralph? Marginally, well, okay. All right, councillor Say.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of comments about Pinkham Way. On page 10, it says the opportunities for providing new public access within part of the site are recognised, and the site guidelines provide that any planning application for new development should demonstrate how public access to the undeveloped part of the site could be achieved. Well, my understanding of the reason it's a site of importance for nature conservation is because there was no public access. It should be kept separate as a wildlife reserve, if you like. I don't see why we need to have public access there at all. And secondly, on 5.31, the same page, it talks about the dual designation of Pinkham Way as employment land and as a site for importance for nature conservation. Now, I was told that the employment land designation was going to be removed, so I'd like to know what's happened to that. Going on, I'd like to know, it talks about the targets of increasing our recycling to 50% by 2025 and 65% by 2030, but there's no explanation of how we're going to manage that. And that may not be part of this plan, but it needs to be part of our plan. And I'm interested in the idea of transportation by rail and water. And is the New River part of that idea, or is it too shallow? I'd be interested to know about that. And finally, on page 131, you've got Parkview Road in there. I thought that's been closed for the last couple of years. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So public access versus site of importance for nature conservation. So the two are not actually totally incompatible. There are often you can have a sink that is compatible with public access. So I do appreciate you wouldn't want them totally overlapping, but it's very standard and actually sometimes encouraged to encourage access to biodiversity and green space with that. So as long as it's managed in the right way, then the two things are compatible, and the detail of that would be looked at as part of any planning application to make sure that it is compatible. It does preserve the nature conservation, but does allow some public access as well. So they're not incompatible land uses. On the transportation by rail and water, no specific precise plans on which water courses would be used. I can't imagine the New River would be used. I think it's talking more generally than that. So there's no specific plans drawn up on that, but particularly rail probably has the best opportunities in Haringey, to be honest, with the rail lines going through the middle. And you referenced Parkview Road at the end. Yes, while some sites will be closed or not operational at the moment, the land is still there and the land is still available for different waste uses. So we're talking about land use planning, which sometimes looks at the longer term than the immediate sort of here and now, what's happening on site. So hopefully that helps cover the questions. So it's still dual designated. So I'm not sure where you got the suggestion that one would be removed. So that's not the case. However, when we come to look at the new local plan, and we'll bring that through strategic planning committee and the member working group, all of the local plan designations such as employment land will be looked at. So that is a question we can look at for the new local plan on whether the dual designation continues to be appropriate. I don't know if Bryce, you have anything to add to that?
No, just to say that two key pieces of evidence for the new local plan are an employment land study, which we'll be able to report to you in the future as part of the new local plan member working group. And we've also got an updated SYNC study. So we'll be able to provide an update on the biodiversity that the site supports and the potential benefits or drawbacks of public access in the future in relation to that.
Thank you. Councillor Over.
Hi, I just want to kind of add to what Councillor Rice said about Brentwood Road in particular. I mean, it's stated at paragraph 2.11 of the North London Waste Plan that the boroughs also seek to improve the health of residents and tackle deprivation. And it's noted at page 15, paragraph 7.8 of the agenda papers that Northumberland Park area has high levels of deprivation than average. And particularly Brentwood Road, as Councillor Rice said, is surrounded by a residential area. So my particular concern is around traffic, because I know that it's mentioned that mitigating measures will be taken into account, such as it being enclosed and having traffic impact assessments. But there's a particular issue with like HGV traffic around that area. So, I mean, my comment basically is that for Brentwood Road to be last resort, last consideration in terms of these three priority areas, and if considered in future for stricter measures to be taken into account, particularly around traffic.
Yeah, really good point, an important point on the impact of traffic. When if and when a proposal comes forward in a planning application, that's something that we can really scrutinise in terms of not just constructing the site and the construction impact, but the traffic management impact as well. And we can apply the latest sort of environmental controls on that, which might be better than what might exist for sort of old sites that have been established a while and we haven't had those controls over them. So there should be an enhanced control over things like HGVs and things like that than might exist at the moment already. In terms of Brentwood Road being a last resort, the plan doesn't prioritise the sites. I don't think we'll be able to sort of put them in a sort of priority ranking order. But even still, and I know I sort of keep saying a similar thing, but if and when a planning applications come forward, they would still need to demonstrate why that is the best site for that particular use. So we would expect them to say why they're not using other sites. So if something came forward on Brentwood Road, we'd expect them to say why they're not looking at the other sites that are within Haringey. So there is still a chance to look at the justification of that, absolutely. And it's just worth saying, you mentioned the deprivation issues in the area as well. Any proposal coming forward would also need to provide employment training and skills obligations. So any sort of employment development would need to look at that, and we'd be able to set some requirements on that to support the local area. And it's also worth saying, actually, waste and recycling uses, given the climate crisis that we're in and the sort of green economy, actually there are possibilities and the potential for really sort of innovative uses on waste and recycling sites. They're at the forefront of, recycling, reuse, and the circular economy. So that it's actually quite an exciting area than what might be seen as traditional waste uses that can provide some good local employment opportunities and potentially even high technology uses that minimise the disruption as well. Can't guarantee that's going to come forward, but there are those industries operating now that might look at these sites. Thank you.
Councillor Bevan, and then Councillor Bevanford.
Yeah, just to confirm, my understanding is that if this plan is rejected, any waste operator can come forward with an application for any area in Haringey to do waste disposal. If this plan is accepted, any operator is restricted to the areas in this plan, which I think is a really important consideration. So I'm fully supportive of this document and plan.
Thank you, Councillor Bevan. Councillor Rice.
Just to say that when I was asking about the perimeters of the northeast Tottenham, it was mentioned Leaside Road. But that Leaside Road now used to be bordering the British Gas, well, it wasn't British Gas, gas works with the gas hometers and so on. The massive housing development going on that site now. So it would not be any use to for waste disposal.
So the plan has looked at adjacent land uses and it has been scrutinised by an independent inspector, and not just the inspector but us as planners have concluded that there are safeguards in place. There are distances that can be proximity that can be implemented that are satisfactory, and the relevant controls can be provided. So we think they are capable of being neighbourly uses, and the distances between the sites are more than acceptable. And that again can be scrutinised and looked at as and when any planning application comes forward in the future. That would need to be looked at in even more detail than at this plan making stage.
Councillor Corley Harrison.
Thanks, Chair. On the Pinkham Waste site, it borders Metropolitan Open Land, or that's part of the site. I couldn't really work out the borders on it, but what's the historical reason that the site allocation isn't all Metropolitan Open Land, and who owns the Metropolitan Open Land? Is that Barnet as well? And then more generally, I can't remember whether it was Yvonne or Matt, but there was a reference to there's targets, but there's no real detail on how we're going to reach these targets as a borough rather than wider than that. At what point, where are we making our determinations about our own waste and how we collect waste and more innovative means of collecting waste, decisions on whether we are sorting at point of collection, for example, or doing mixed waste, all of those sorts of things? Does that come in the local plan that we make those determinations? Because we've had planning applications come before us where it's basically waste is collected by Veolia, it's collected in this manner, that's how it works. When actually probably there are better waste collection methods that can be used on large estates, for example, that will facilitate less trips and you know, modern technology and all that sort of thing. So when do we get to determine on that?
Thank you, Councillor. So I'll come in on some of those and ask Mr Tudball to come in as well. In terms of, the targets and how they're set as a borough and the sort of wider picture. So this is only dealing with planning policy and future planning applications. The wider issue around targets, the council's relationship with the North London Waste Authority, Veolia contract, all those types of things are not part of this plan and not part of what this service does. That would be for our waste service colleagues in the Environment and Neighbourhoods Directorate. So I don't have the answers on that today, but that's something that we can certainly pick up with our waste services colleagues. However, there are some things we can do in planning policy. So, for example, where you're looking at a particular planning application and there's the waste refuse section of a development, there are new policy and guidance documents on how best to design those, so it's more accessible in terms of recycling and minimises disruption to residents, etc. So we can make sure that that type of thing is incorporated in the new local plan. So there's sort of, I think there's a London-wide London Waste and Recycling Board or something like that that has new guidance since the local plan was adopted on those types of things. So we can look at those and control those and have more innovative ways on it. But the bigger picture sort of contracts of waste and where it goes and what's done with it, that's outside the remit of this plan and this particular service. And just going back to the Councillor Rice's previous comment, Councillor Carlin has helpfully reminded me, things like proximity to residential units and how things can be designed to be neighbour friendly, we can also work on in the new local plan as well. So whilst we consider there are very strong safeguards in this plan, there's another chance to look at that type of policy in the new local plan as well. So so there's another opportunity there. And I'll let Mr Tudball pick up on some of the other points. There was a question about MOL, which I don't think I have the answer to myself. So you might be able to elaborate on that. Thanks.
Councillor Corley Harrison, I've got the image up again of Pinkham Way. So the image on the bottom right of the slide indicates the land ownership. So the land to the north is owned by the North London Waste Authority. The land to the south is owned by London Borough of Barnet. So no part of the allocation falls within Metropolitan Open Lands. However, Barnet do own, as I understand, the adjacent metropolitan open land.
Okay, councillor Corley Harrison.
Yeah, just a quick question coming back on Rob. In terms of setting policy, so for example, we set a policy, as far as I'm aware, that if a site had the facilities to do so and was large enough, then it must provide provision for connecting to the Den in future, as an example. Where would we set a policy that would mean that there would have to be, you know, an underground waste management system on a site that was large enough? Would that be within a particular policy document?
That's a really good point. Yeah, so you can get some sort of major and strategic large sites that have, as you've referred to, underground waste collection. There's a system, as an example, called NVAC, which has been used in a few sites across London, I think including in Wembley, in the Wembley master plan area, which is a sort of underground sort of tunnels and pipes and things where waste can be put into one place, which again minimises disruption on residents. So yes, that's something that can be looked at as part of the local plan as well. I think the London plan has some policies on that as well. It would be for some of the very big sites. So it's a good point to raise. So not a direct issue for the North London Waste Plan, but certainly something we can look at for the new local plan going forward.
Any more questions or comments, please? No, okay. Does the committee note the content of this report and the inspector's report on the North London Waste Plan set out in Appendix A? Thank you. And does the committee agree to refer this report and the appended documents to Cabinet and full Council with a recommendation to adopt the North London Waste Plan at Appendix C, including main modifications at Appendix B and associated changes to the policies map Appendix D?
Are our comments going to be included?
Yes.
Yes, they will.
Yes.
So with our comments, yes, I'll agree that, yes.
Yes, it comments. Yes, so it's with our comments. So is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, so we move on to item 8, which is Planning Services Update 2021 to 22 quarter 4. So can I now invite officers to introduce the report? The lead officers are Bryce Tudball, Rob Shizovsky, Robbie McNaughter and Bob McIver. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll kick off. And yes, lots of Roberts in the team, I'm afraid. So thanks for bearing with us. So this is our update report. We normally present it roughly every quarter for planning and building control services. So it starts from page 411, I think, in the pack, and it's split into a number of sections. So I'll ask the relevant head of service to introduce their section, and perhaps we can take questions at the end of each section just to break it down a bit. So the first one is development management with Robbie McNaughter, and then we've got planning policy with Bryce Tudball, and then we've got building control with Bob McIver. So we'll start off with Robbie McNaughter just to introduce the development management section, which starts on page 411. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. So I'll just talk you through key performance figures and updates from development management starting on page 412. So members will note at 5.1 that major applications performance remains at 100% applications within time. Minors is at 90% and others, which includes householders and smaller applications, is at 91. So continuing high performance, expected to be in the top quartile of London and the UK. We have had some challenges recently, losing 2 important staff members in December. So that has impacted the figures somewhat, led to a slight increase in backlog, but new officers have been recruited to replace those positions, and performance is starting to level off again. And to note, appeal performance has continued to be excellent. So to note at 5.2, there's 3 important measures of performance that we look at, and there's thresholds we have to remain above. Otherwise, we can be designated as a poorly performing authority, and central government can intervene and determine our planning applications. Those thresholds are noted in the bullet points. Majors within time at 50%, minors at others at least 70%, which you'll note we're well in excess of those targets. And then appeals lost in both minor and major applications to be below 10%, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail. And then just looking at the overall performance that feeds into those, we decided 15 major applications, which is a slight decrease on last year, reflecting COVID and less planning applications coming in for larger developments just due to the uncertainty. Average time for those has decreased to 257 days, which includes the time to present that to committee, to carry out the consultations, and then often is increased by the amount of time it takes to agree the legal agreement. Minor applications, largely the same, with the average time remaining about the same. Others, a similar number of applications, and with a slight increase in the end-to-end time for those, noting the backlog and the impact that's had. Time to validate an application at 5.4 is down to 4 days, which is positive. And then you'll note at 5.5 just the number of applications. So applications received has returned to normal levels and is comparable to last year. At 5.6, you'll just note officer caseloads have increased, as I say, just due to that loss of officers, and that's something we're working through. So that those are up from 50 to 73. And that has also increased the number of on-hand applications. So that's really, it was at 550 last year, but it's at just over 700. So that probably is a good measure of the number of cases that we're trying to move on and get rid of. And then at 5.8, just to note that the number of applications which are 26 weeks over their target date is 159. So a large number of those are actually waiting Section 106 signs. Some of those reflect the issues with backlog, and applicants can request their feedback on those, although it doesn't happen very often. So that's the picture for performance stats, and we'll touch more on the majors, but taking on to pre-application advice. So at paragraph 5.9, pre-applications have increased on last year, generating slightly less income due to the number of larger sites not being the same as has come forward. A significant increase in householder pre-application advice at 123 compared to 96, and that has increased the income to £43,000 for the financial year. And at 5.10, just to note that planning performance agreements have generated £1.2 million of income. So that's nearly double and more than double last year's performance. And we're continuing to reach out to ask applicants to enter into those. This has in fact impacted on the stat for pre-application meetings. So more people coming into planning performance agreements than seeking a one-off pre-application advice, which has increased that income and been reflected in the pre-application income reducing. So, you know, getting people into agreements and getting that income through both those. Just at the start of the financial year, we introduced new express householder advice and fast-track certificates of lawfulness. So paragraph 5.11, just noting that 16 instances of those have been requested, generating £7,000, and 37 instances of the fast-track pre-applications have generated £8,000. So that's new income streams to the service that we wouldn't have had previously. And then finally, just to note at 5.13, the final performance target is in relation to appeals and overturns. So that is basically taking 2 years of your major and minor applications and appeal decisions, and then allowing 9 months to lapse after that for those appeal decisions to work their way through, and then measuring how you're performing against that. So at 5.17, you'll note that for 2018-20, which is the last year we've been assessed on, the figure was at the threshold of 10%. So we avoided designation. For the current period, 2019-21, we have unfortunately had 2 appeal losses that may take us over the threshold. So one was 300 to 306 West Green Road, refused by committee against officer recommendation, and then Gildens, which was an appeal in Highgate. And unfortunately, the inspector found in our favour and dismissed the appeal. However, following a legal challenge, there was then a second decision made, which the appeal was allowed. So, you know, a very marginal decision has taken us over the threshold. We have one further appeal pending, which was a decision made at committee, and that won't fall within this financial year. So at 5.19, you'll just note where we think we are in terms of those figures. So it looks like for 1921, we will exceed that threshold at 15%. 2022 looks better, but potentially in excess of that threshold. So at 5.21, you'll just note that the figures will be published later this month, and we will then have a chance to make our case to central government before there's any designation, which would be potentially published in September. You know, those statistics are only one aspect of our performance, and feeling is that you know, given the exceptional performance on everything else, we have a very good case for persuading the government not to designate us. We're proactively supporting housing, developing a new local plan, and we are working hard to ensure that we defend those appeals robustly. So then finally, just moving on to planning enforcement. Number of complaints largely comparable to previous years. Notices served has increased 74 compared to 58 previously. There's been a slight issue with acknowledging complaints at 5.22. You'll note that there's been a staff shortage in the customer services team, which means they're not turning over those complaints as quickly as possible. But that does seem to be improving now with some new staff. And then at 5.24, just to note that we had a relatively recent confiscation order under the Proceeds of Crime Act for someone who hadn't complied with an enforcement notice and was successfully prosecuted, so securing £100,000 there. And we are looking at ways to increase that income through bringing some of that work in-house and continuing to chase people who aren't complying with that. And just to note at 5.26, the site visits we carried out over the last year, and we'll be expecting to do more of those with the current committee over the summer. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Chair, shall we take questions on that section first before we move on to the other bits of the report?
Questions? So I've got Councillor Corley Harrison.
Thanks, Chair. A bit of a drop in figures. Do you think that's just down to obviously the staff changes that you referenced, or was there other issues that have been rectified? And then on planning enforcement, it'd be good to know how many cases an enforcement officer is overseeing at any one time, because obviously we have that sort of rough figure for the planning cases, and what our expectations as members are on timescales for planning enforcement. So there's an acknowledgement that complaints should be, you know, acknowledged within one day, but that doesn't really mean anything if nothing then happens for months. So if you can give us an indication of how long cases are taking to progress through. I know that each one is very, very different from another, but an indication would be good.
Yes, thank you. Some good questions there. So yeah, I think one of the issues that we saw last year was that with COVID, we got a large number of planning applications, the highest we'd ever received just before the summer break. So roughly this time last year, you know, I suppose guessing what happened, people had spent a lot of time at home. They drew up their projects and submitted them to us. So that was difficult for the team to handle. and that then was followed by staff leaving. So I think it's just been a really uncertain time. We wouldn't normally, we're able to manage those ebbs and flows of applications, but some of that backlog has built up from just that sort of stress on the system, and has followed through. So we are now turning a corner on that, and things will improve, and generating record levels of income allow us to resource the team well. And enforcement, I'm always conscious that they're a bit of the unsung hero of the planning service, and are performing really well. So targets are for complaints to be acknowledged within a day, and a site visit within 21 days, and then a decision made, whether that's to progress enforcement or negotiate, or to close the case for whatever reason, should be made within 8 weeks. And I think for next time it would be good to include those stats, because this month performance was at 100% and meeting that target within 8 weeks. So performance is strong there.
Councillor Rice, did you have, Councillor Bevan, someone else, did you put your hand up? Yeah, so it's Councillor Rice next, please.
Yeah, very short. I'm not clear when the Mayor for London get involved in this process, in allowing or not allowing matters which have been agreed by the local authority. I know in Hale Wharf we had a meeting on the application. We approved it, and then it got to the Mayor somehow, and he we rejected it. It got to the Mayor, he approved it, which seems to me upside of the democracy. If the local people decide something, why should the Mayor interfere with it? But could you tell me where the Mayor gets involved in this process, please?
Sure. So, Councillor, on applications of a certain threshold, which is set out in the Greater London Authority Act legislation, the Mayor has a process that should be followed on each of those applications. So they should be referred during the consultation period, which is known as stage 1. And then when a decision is made, they're referred again, which is known as stage 2. If the Mayor doesn't agree with the council's decision or has a concern about it, he can call that in, and then a hearing is held, and a decision is made by the Mayor to either support the local authority or to make a different decision. So in the example of Hill Wharf, that went to a hearing, and following a refusal at committee, and the Mayor decided to approve the application following a hearing.
What is the threshold which the Mayor operates?
It is any building of over 30 metres in height, and 150 residential units would be the main ones you would see, and then there are other figures for commercial, and I think that there's also call-ins in relation to metropolitan open land and waste as well. So the main ones that you would see would be tall buildings and very large residential developments.
Thank you. Councillor Bevan?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a really good planning service, but I am a bit concerned that 3 outcomes are substantially worse than the previous year, 5.6, 5.7 and 5.8, although you say it's due to staff shortages, so I'm a bit concerned about that. The planning enforcement, you never get a date when your inquiry about planning enforcement will be answered. You get an acknowledgement within a day or two saying it will be looked into, but quite often you have to chase up what was the outcome of that looking into. You never get a date. You will get a final outcome within 3 weeks or whatever. So I think that is a concern, and I think there should be some stats per enforcement cases per officer. And then one other thing that's declined is the acknowledgement within 1 working day, which has gone down quite badly, and it mentions the customer service team. That's not within your service, is it, the customer service team? Because I notice you say that's going to improve. Well, the customer service team hasn't improved for the last, well, as far back as I can remember. That customer service team has never improved. So I think you're wishful thinking if you think that's going to solve that problem for you.
Okay. Yeah, some interesting points there, and I think the reason to be too optimistic at the moment is we are implementing a new IT system in September, which will really modernise a lot of our processes and deal with some of those issues that you raised. So a lot of things are relying on human input that should be automated. So things like updating you when a site visit's been carried out or when a decision's made will all be automated without human intervention, which will lessen the workload on officers and avoid the issues you're raising. That also will take pressure off the customer services team. We expect, and a lot of those processes will be automated. They do sit outside the planning service, but we liaise with them regularly, and we're aware of the issues they're facing and the remedies they put in place.
Councillor Corley-Harris.
I'll follow up on John's point. That was a follow up on my point, which is regarding monitoring of enforcement. Is there, with this new system, a way that we can bring in a more visible method of us tracking enforcement cases? I mean, obviously a planning application, we can see what objections have gone in, etc. We can see the decision notice. We get nothing on an enforcement case unless we ask, and you can't go through a member inquiry every time. Or maybe just there needs to be something in, like with members inquiries, there's a 10-day response. There needs to be some limits where we get feedback through, because it is the one I feel we have to chase more than any other service. That and the environmental side of enforcement, which is the same issue, I would say, but I don't think that falls within you guys.
Yes, yeah, no, I expect that the new system will address that. So we can, for example, if the date of the site visit is entered by the officer, that can automatically send you an email to say that. If you haven't had an update following the initial decision, say that the decision is to negotiate, that obviously leaves things slightly open-ended, and I can understand you might not hear how those negotiations are going. So you can set up the system to prompt that after another 8 weeks, if nothing's happened, that an update's due, or provide that automatically. That there's lots of options there. I think we'll be conscious of avoiding sending you too much, but trying to find that balance to keep residents informed. I don't expect we'll put in place a public portal, but it will be much more automated in terms of keeping you in the loop.
Okay, thank you. So moving on.
Yep, thank you, Chair. So Bryce Tudball will introduce the section of the report which covers planning policy and infrastructure, which starts on page 416. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm just going to quickly update you on timescales for the council's emerging new local plan, update you on some of the evidence base in relation to that, and talk about some of the planning policy team's other work streams, and an update on the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, which was published by the government recently. So paragraph 5.27, it sets out an updated timetable for the emerging new local plan. So the first step in that process was the first steps engagement, which took place at the end of 2020. We got over 1,500 responses. We've collated all of those now and moving forward to a draft local plan. So the team's busy preparing that at the moment, and we're looking to get that out for consultation by the end of the year, get that completed by the end of the year. So we'll then pull together feedback on the draft policies and proposals in that draft local plan. We're then looking to prepare a proposed submission local plan next year. So that is the local plan that the council wants to adopt, with a view to that going to examination later next year and adoption towards the end of the year, or maybe at the beginning of 2024. Now, in terms of what we've been doing on the local plan, so there's key elements to it. There's the engagement side of things. There's also the evidence base. So the report sets out what's happening in terms of evidence base. So as you can see from the table in 5.28, we've completed most of the key bits of evidence that will underpin the new local plan. with the couple of remaining ones being the whole plan viability study. So looking carefully at things like what level of affordable housing is deliverable. We'll also be doing some work later this year around transport and infrastructure. And then to note that a key piece of work underpinning the local plan is a characterisation study, which officers are doing in-house. And that's going to inform capacity for change and growth in different parts of the borough. That's going to be a key piece of work which we'll be looking to present to the new local plan member working group in the future. And for those of you who haven't been involved with that previously, that comprises the members of this committee. We've consulted with them, I think 8 times in the last 18 months or so around the new local plan. And we'll be looking to consult with them again in the future, with the meetings to be chaired by the cabinet member. So draft local plans under preparation at the moment. Just a couple of, to give you a bit of a flavour about what we're looking at in terms of the local plan. So it will look to reflect the council's latest strategic ambitions and aspirations. And some key themes that will run through the plan will be sustainability and responding to the climate emergency, health and well-being, which has really been brought to the forefront through the pandemic, and also equalities and responding to the Fairness Commission. And we'll be looking at things like housing and employment as tools to deliver those key aims of sustainability, health and well-being and equalities. In terms of some of the other key work streams of the planning policy team at the moment, so we've mentioned around the North London Waste Plan already today. The still partial review is another key one. So we reached a key milestone with the still partial review back in March. So back in March, Cabinet approved a revised community infrastructure levy charging schedule. That takes effect on the 1st of September 22. That follows a 5 or 6 year process, but what it will do is it will increase still rates for a number of uses in the east of the borough, but principally residential uses. And that will help raise more money towards infrastructure, new and improved infrastructure in the borough. I mentioned around the levelling up and regeneration bill. So over the last couple of years, we've brought a number of updates to this committee in relation to planning changes, of which there have been a number and of which the government is always suggesting new changes. So back in 2020, the government published a planning white paper, which was a major document setting out the government's proposed changes to the planning system. So we submitted a substantial response to that consultation, which we reported to this committee. We were expecting the government to respond to that white paper in the form of a planning bill. That's no longer going to be the case. Instead, the government's gone down the direction of a levelling up and regeneration bill. And this follows a levelling up and regeneration white paper, which they published earlier in the year. So to give you a feeling of the response to the white paper, there were over 40,000 responses. So the government's taken some time to go through those. But the government's now published this levelling up and regeneration bill. It is a big document, and the supporting documents are also pretty hefty. But just to give you a flavour of some of the things that it includes. There's a number of things I think we support, some we maybe wouldn't support, and some I guess we're fairly neutral about. One of the things it does propose is increasing planning fees for minor and major applications by 25% and 35% respectively. So that does need to be consultation, but I think that's something that we can broadly support as a local planning authority. It also sets out plan changes to local plans in terms of how they should be prepared and how they should be formatted. So the idea is that they will, instead of the kind of largely text-based documents at the moment, they will be much more map-based, and they'll make use of kind of standardised and reusable data. So that should help to make local plans and the planning system much more transparent. Government's also proposing that local plans will be subject to a statutory timetable, and their expectation set out is that they will be prepared within 30 months, so 2.5 years. The government said in terms of local plans that we should be preparing just one local plan. So at the moment, our local plan comprises 4 separate DPDs, but as you'll be aware, we're looking to consolidate those into one single document. So that's the direction the government wants to take us in. The government also specified that it wants to limit local plans to locally specific matters, such as allocating land for development, detailing required infrastructure, and setting out principles of good design. So this is moving away from your kind of heavy text-based policies and being much clearer about what we will and won't grant permission for. Something which we have some concern about is that the government's proposing to publish national development management policies. Now, these would become part of that, or they would have the same weight as our development plan in planning decisions. And these would essentially replace our own development management policies, as for example, are set out in our development management policies, DPD. So I think that's something that we have some level of concern about, and will make representations in the future, because it will mean that we lose control over certain elements of planning compared to what we have at the present time. The government's also proposed that the scope of matters that the London plan can cover will be reduced. So the London plan is meant to be a strategic document. I think it largely is, but it does stray into some significant detail, and the government wants to reduce the level to which it can go into those kind of non-strategic matters. One of the key focuses of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill and the planning changes is around improving design. And the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill says that all local planning authorities should have a design code in place covering their entire area. So I think design codes have been around for quite some time. Probably a good example one is the South Tottenham House Extensions SPD. But the expectation is that we would have design codes to cover the entire borough. That would be a significant undertaking and require a lot of resource. So that would be the principal concern there. But this is moving more towards rules-based planning, where you can clearly see what will and won't be appropriate. Another major one, so I said that we've just approved a revised community infrastructure level charging schedule. The government's proposing to replace the current system of securing developer contributions, which is through Section 106 and SEAL. And over the last 10 years or so, we found a way, I think, to make SEAL and Section 106 work alongside each other. So we spent a long time getting to that point, but the government's decided that it's going to replace Section 106 and SEAL with a new infrastructure levy. Although there is an acknowledgement that Section 106 would need to remain in some way, shape or form, because it does play an important role in a number of facets of infrastructure contributions. So there isn't too much detail about the infrastructure levy at the moment, but we'll keep a very close eye on that. What the government has said is that the expectation is that councils would raise at least as much money under the infrastructure levy as they do currently under Section 106 and SEAL, but unclear exactly how that would be assured. And also some concerns about what this means for affordable housing, if affordable housing is going to be included as part of the infrastructure levy and not kept separate as it is at the moment and secured through Section 106. And then just to finish off, so there's a long list of proposals set out within the report. Now, in coming months, the government will be publishing a lot more information around its plans, but what we do know is that the changes are expected to take place from 2024. What there will need to be is quite a lot of consultation. There'll need to be associated regulations and changes to national policy. So as a planning and policy team, as a council, we'll be keeping a close eye on those. Wherever we've got the opportunity to feedback and input to government, we will do. And where there are things that we have particular concerns about, we will make those concerns heard. So I expect that we'll bring more detail to this committee in due course about the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill as that information becomes available. So that is the end of my section of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Any questions? Councillor Bevan.
Well, it's not a question, it's just a comment. I mean, we've had many proposals from the government before. They announced them and then they all get dropped. I'm just wondering if it's worthwhile spending loads and loads of time considering and responding to all these proposals when, let's be quite honest, most of them probably will not happen, even more so with the state the government's in. So it's just a comment, really.
Thanks, Councillor. I think we do note that. I think we've seen a lot from the government in the last 10 years that they haven't delivered on. So I think what we can expect is that some of the measures will get implemented, some will be watered down, and probably some will disappear. So it's a case of wait and see, really. But take on your point about not expending too many resources responding to proposals that may not eventuate.
Councillor Rice.
Can I just ask, what's the budget of the planning service? And how much of that budget do you actually raise from fees and charges?
I will get back to you on that one. It's set in the full council budget in March, so the papers have it in there. I'll dig out the answer for you. In terms of fees, it's over 50% that it's funded through that, and with the increase in fees proposed in the bill, that will obviously significantly help. Although we do expect the increase in fees proposed alongside the bill probably won't take probably won't come into effect until the middle of next year. So there's still some time actually where fees have not increased for, I think, about 10 years. So when you look at inflation in the last 10 years, let alone this year, fees have been frozen for a very long time. So it does make it a struggle to fund the planning service just on fees, but it is something that we're working towards, and we'll be in a better place if the government does increase planning fees for us. And I'll find that figure for you.
Thank you. Councillor Corley-Harris.
Yes, are we going to feed into the response, or I think which happened previously, or whether you would draft something and it would come before the committee or whatever? And then on design codes, do we have design codes as it stands? Because there's been reference before, not necessarily in this committee, but in discussions about design codes and standard. I mean, John's mentioned painting railings black numerous times in this committee, I think, things like that. So do we have these that exist that would feed into this, and are we actually abiding by our design codes if we do?
So I think the best example of a document we have and we use for planning decisions, which would be considered a design code, is the South Tottenham House Extensions SPD, which is very prescriptive about what will and won't be accepted with type 1, 2 and 3 extensions. That's kind of the direction of travel when it comes to design codes, more than your generic kind of design-based policies. It's setting out exactly what you will and won't accept. Now, I mentioned that one of the key documents, evidence-based documents underpinning the local plan is a characterisation study. What we've done with the characterisation study is a lot of detailed mapping of the typologies across the borough. So potentially what we'll look at in the future is whether we could have design codes applying to certain typologies in the borough, like for instance, terrace housing. So it's all mapped, it's all digitised, it's going to be a great resource for future planning, but that's the direction we're headed in, where it's all mapped, and we'll look at whether we could have kind of generic design codes to cover terrace housing across large swathes of the borough, for instance. So that's what we're looking at, I think.
Okay, thank you. So
Sorry, and whether we would feed into the response.
I don't know off the top of my head what we currently have in terms of consultation deadlines for that, but it's certainly something which we could seek your input through over email. I'd be happy to do that.
Just to elaborate on that, the bill itself, it's not a consultation because it's going through Parliament. So we're not responding directly to the bill. But when the government does announce individual consultations on particular measures like design codes or something else, the new national planning policies, new national development plan policies, we will certainly respond to those and bring the draft responses to this committee. So you'll probably get it in bite-sized chunks.
So moving on to building control, I think, yes?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And that will be Bob McIver, Head of Building Control.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rob. Yeah, page 419 in your pack. We've got the table of stats. You will see it's showing a strong recovery from the pandemic years. We had a lot of applications last year, took in quite a lot of fee as well, and actually increased their market share, which was really positive. But I have to put a proviso on that. That was due to a number of applications we received from Homes at Haringey for their estate work. So it just did sway it a little bit. You also see that dangerous structures ever prevalent. That's both in work time and out of hours, because we are 24/7 all year round. Just going through, picking up as well as our normal workload, what we've been faced with over the last couple of years really is work reverting back to us from private building control bodies. For whatever reason, where they cancel an initial notice, that work then comes back to us to pick up. And it's problematic all round. The clients probably didn't want us in the first place, and they definitely didn't want us when we go and ask for a new fee and ask for them to expose their works, which they thought was previously approved by a private body. So there's been quite a lot of that, and there is an approved inspector currently having problems at the moment because of a court case. That approved inspector is Ascent Building Control. And at the moment, they're trying to cancel their current applications with us and pass them on to another approved inspector, which is causing us a lot of time and expense for which we don't actually get paid for. Dangerous structures, as I said, quite a lot of dangerous structures over the past year. We also did a piece of work over the last year, which Councillor Corley Harrison will be aware of, in Crouch End, Muswell Hill and Green Lanes about falling masonry work, where we sent out lots of letters. Response was very, very poor. So we've gone to Plan C, I think we're on there, where surveyors are going round and identifying obviously problematic properties, and then we're writing to them and taking a more active role on that. Again, that's quite intensive, and it's not 100% accurate, because when you're looking up 3 stories from the ground, it's not that easy. That's why what we try to do is put the onus back on the owners, and it is the owner's responsibility at the end of the day. It's their property. They have to maintain it. So we're still doing that. As you're probably all aware, today is the 5th anniversary of Grenfell, the tragedy at Grenfell. Out of that came the Hackett report, and then out of that came the Building Safety Bill, which the government pushed through. Building Safety Bill finally got royal assent in right at the end of April, and is now an act. So we're looking at a lot of secondary legislation coming out of that. I'm on various working parties across London, seeing how we can work with the building safety regulator. And in fact, we're meeting the building safety regulator this coming week on Thursday. But there will be a lot of changes coming forward, one of which will mean that the developer's right to choose a building control provider for in-scope buildings goes. They won't have that choice anymore. Yeah, as well as the Building Safety Bill and the Building Safety Act, DLUC has also been busy changing and adding to new approved documents, which is what we use to check plans with. So much so, we've got 6 new approved documents coming into force tomorrow. 2 of those are existing documents updated, that's Part F and Part L. And then there's 2 new documents. One is on overheating and one is on charging of electric vehicles. And then lastly, just an update on the service as a whole. We managed to move from fully office working to home working during the pandemic. And it's been a seamless integration, really. It's worked really well. Throughout that period, surveyors have been out and about in the borough. You will see from earlier, the inspections are still high, and we are very much, we will inspect. We don't want to take photographs, as some private building control bodies will do. We will inspect and we will enforce where necessary. We've taken on 1 apprentice in November, and we're literally just about to press the button on an advert for a 2nd apprentice, hopefully to start uni in September. The other thing that the building safety regulator will be doing for all building controls, be they local authority or private, is registering the services. So we will be a registered service that will be regularly audited and have to meet key stats, and not only register the service as a whole, but each and every surveyor within building control will have to be a registered person as well. Without having registered surveyors, we won't be able to run the service. So that's going to be quite key. That's got lots of associated problems, not least having our staff poached by others, including in the private practice. think that will do. Just one last thing, probably. I haven't put it on the report, but just to update you, we're also doing work on the Commonwealth Games. Probably think, why are we doing work on the Commonwealth Games? It's in Birmingham. Why are we involved? We were asked to be the independent chair of all the SAG meetings for the Commonwealth Game venues up in Birmingham. So it's a big pat on the back for Harringay. It's a good bit of kudos for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? So Councillor Bedley.
Yeah, before I make a few comments, Bob, I didn't quite get that thing that you said about the private building control causing you lots of trouble on that company. I didn't quite get, and you said it cost you a lot of money and you don't get any. I didn't quite understand the whole way that is working.
What that is, we've had it previously, and what happens is if a private building control can no longer carry out that function, because unlike us, we don't disappear, but they're a private company. And because of Grenfell, they had lots of problems with insurance. So they haven't been able to, a lot of them haven't been able to get insurance. So they end up not practicing anymore. So they have to cancel the notice that they put into us. If they do that mid-job or before they've signed that job off as complete, that job reverts back to the local authority to complete. Now that job may be 10% complete, it may be 95% complete, but we have to then go in, and unfortunately we haven't got x-ray eyes or anything like that, so we have to ask for it to be exposed, we have to ask for all the calcs, the plans, etc., and we have to do an awful lot of work. Now we do get a fee for it, but that fee's not really representative of the amount of work that we have to put into it.
Thanks. So, well, I hear what you say about being chosen for the Commonwealth Games. So I think that's an indication of the, what shall I say, your status that you hold in the building control industry, for want of a better word. But one thing I did attend last year, you had a forum with property developers, which I attended, because I was really concerned that building control wasn't being promoted to private developers. You said to me, well, if you listen to this forum, you'll see we do try and promote our building control, even though we're in competition with these private people that Judith Hackett said should basically be abolished, which never happened. But when it was finished, the mention of building control was so small. In fact, I hardly noticed it. So I was really disappointed that you weren't taking that opportunity to really promote our building control service, like saying all our officers have this qualification. I know you're concerned that you'll be criticised because it's unfair competition. You're promoting your service when there's private people doing this, but I just really think it should have been much more highlighted at your forum with property developers, because I mean, I really hardly noticed it at all, and I was looking for it. So it's just a comment. I wish you would, what shall I say, blow your own trumpet a bit more at these forums. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just come in on that one. I think if you're referring to the agents forum that we held in December, there was a presentation from Building Control, but you may be thinking it was missing because it was not Bob McIver himself, it was a member of his team, Pierre Chenier. So there was a Building Control presentation as part of that, precisely for the reason we like to promote our Harringay building control services as much as possible over private sector providers. However, we'll note that going forward and make sure it's absolutely prominent as part of the presentation to agents.
Yeah, I think it was really, the guy who's doing it, I think was quite laid back. So.
Thank you for that comment, Councillor Bevan. Councillor Corley-Harrison.
You didn't have more questions? All right. So just wondering, is the service profitable? And are you doing out of borough works other than Birmingham? Presumably so. I'm wondering what your involvement is in works being carried out by what was Homes Haringey, now Haringey Council, as a result of Grenfell and the changes due to Grenfell, such as, you know, improvements to properties, new fire doors, heat alarms, and that sort of thing. Does your involvement in that come at the end, an inspection, or are you advising on what is needed at all as a result of either this bill or obviously the reviews that have come before?
Thank you. Profitable. We're not allowed to be profitable. We've got fee regulations which say that we have to break even. So we break even, we can't make a profit. So that's the answer to that one. Out of borough, yes, we are still doing works. We do an awful lot of work in Barnet and Enfield. We have more problems when we go into Islington and Camden. Most of that is just surveyors' time, really, getting in and around those areas. So it's easier for us to go out rather than in. And involvement with Homes, or what was Homes Haringey, we don't get involved at the very start. They put an application in the same as if you was a private person doing works, they put the application into us then. And you're absolutely right with the fire doors. They've got a whole range of works going on at the moment with replacement fire doors and replacement fire alarms, or I should say fire alarms in the communal areas. So we've got a whole range of applications that today we've got an email from them. There's going to be a whole host coming back in, so hopefully it will sway the figures a little bit more. But just for your understanding as well. So I said we've got new regulations coming in tomorrow. So literally 5 o'clock tonight was the deadline for getting applications in. In the last 2 days, we've had 80 initial notices. A good number of those initial notices haven't even got planning yet. So what they're doing is trying to get around the system, and they're using approved inspectors to do that way. Perfectly legally, I should add. It's not illegal, but they've just gone to the approved inspector, giving very little information. They've put the notice in, so they're, as long as they start the works before this day next year, they can go on the old regulations. So that's the sort of thing we're facing.
And if I may, just to elaborate on some of what Bob has said, in terms of Homes Haringey now in-house, there's in addition to the regulatory requirements in building control, there's wider work going on, making sure that we are all as officers in building control, planning, former Homes Haringey, housing services, etc., are up to date with the legislation. So I chair a building safety working group internally of officers across the council to make sure we're absolutely on top of that. And now that Homes Haringey is in house, we'll be working even closer together on the new requirements on that. And they do have specialist officers on building standards and fire safety to make sure that's fully looked at. So it's not just sort of left to the regulations to just sort of check it at the end. It's absolutely built in and fundamental. There's a phrase called the golden thread from the sort of very beginning of a development through to the end, or from an existing property. So it's a really important piece of work that I know that Homes Haringey now in house take it extremely seriously. And we also, with registered providers, Bob and I have chaired some meetings recently with registered providers as well, so housing associations, to make sure that we have some information from them and they're keeping up to speed with the changes, and that we have some information about those as well. Albeit they have their own responsibilities, we like to go beyond what the bare minimum of the regulations say to make sure that we are covering everything.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? No? No. Okay, so thank you very much for the reports. Thank you. So is the report noted? Thank you. Moving on then to item 9. There are no new items of urgent business. So we move on to dates of future meetings. And can the committee note that the next meeting date is the 22nd of October 2022. So I think that will that's the end of the meeting. So I'll bring the meeting to an end. Thank you. Thank you very much and good evening.
Barbara?